Now the UN Secretary-General is urging restraint to avoid a humanitarian crisis in Myanmar. A week ago, fighters from the Rohingya minority attacked police posts, prompting a brutal army crackdown in Rakhine State. The military has now dramatically increased the official death toll there to almost 400 people. It says around 370 Rohingya fighters have died, along with 14 civilians, 13 members of the security forces and 2 government officials. But activists say hundreds of civilians have died. And at least 40 Rohingya are known to have drowned after an estimated 38,000 crossed into Bangladesh. Those fleeing accuse the army of raiding villages and burning down homes. There are thought to be around 1.1 million Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar, but they've suffered decades of persecution as the country's leaders consider them illegal immigrants. Florence Louis reports from Yangon.
It's been a long, difficult night for these Rohingya, and it's not over yet. Young and old, weak, sick, exhausted and afraid. They're on the move, fearful of remaining in their villages in Myanmar.
The soldiers killed so many people. They burnt down every single house in our village. They didn't spare a single child. They killed everyone, old men and women and children. They killed them by cutting their throats. When they saw us, they opened fire.
This group made it across the border into Bangladesh, but say they still don't feel safe. They're worried they'll be sent back.
They torched entire villages. Thousands of people have gathered near the border. I still don't know where my relatives are. Everyone went in different directions. I fled with my 3 children.
Myanmar military forces are again cracking down in Rakhine State, after fighters from a group calling itself the Arakan Rohingya Salvation Army launched coordinated attacks last Friday on police stations and an army base. Escaping Rohingya civilians tell of atrocities committed by Myanmar security forces.
The border guard police targeted Rohingya women and children. They took them from their homes. They raped the women and tore their clothes.
Officials in Rakhine State deny the military is committing human rights abuses. In a statement, a spokesman said, "It's impossible the military is firing at fleeing Rohingya. Some villages are stuck, and we are saving them. We're firing in self-defense. There's no operation against them." There's not a lot of sympathy for the Rohingya here in Myanmar. The government considers them to be illegal migrants and doesn't recognize them as an ethnic group. They're often referred to as Bengalis, implying they're from neighboring Bangladesh. The UN estimates 40,000 Rohingya have crossed the border into Bangladesh in the past week. The Bangladesh government says it cannot cope with any more refugees and has closed the border with Myanmar. For the Rohingya, their nightmare continues. Stateless and persecuted, with nowhere to call home. Florence Louis, Al Jazeera, Yangon.
Well, joining us via Skype from Bangkok is Phil Robertson. He's the Deputy Director for Asia for Human Rights Watch. Good of you to join us, sir. The government of Aung San Suu Kyi blames all this violence on Rohingya militants, the military saying that of this toll of 400 people, only a tiny fraction are civilians, and yet there are all these reports of civilians in their thousands being fired upon with heavy weapons. Is it at all conceivable that these numbers given out by the military are correct?
Well, it may be correct for the specific purpose of fighting against that insurgent group, but it's certainly not correct in terms of the larger impact on the villages and the civilians who are fleeing across the border. Because we're seeing in Bangladesh people, new arrivals coming with bullet wounds, coming with shrapnel wounds, having been on the move for days without food, without any sort of assistance, evading Bangladesh border guard patrols to finally cross into Bangladesh in a very desperate situation. And what we're thinking is taking place right now, according to the information we have and based on some of the satellite sensory imagery that we're getting, is that there is, again, a scorched earth tactics by the government of Myanmar, the Burma army, against these villages. That they may be trying to target insurgents, but they are certainly hitting all the civilians as well.
And doing so, as I said, with heavy weaponry at most. As we understand it, these so-called insurgents are armed with little more than homemade machetes and things like that. Meanwhile, these thousands of civilians are on the move towards Bangladesh, a country which arguably has a responsibility to help, but doesn't seem to be too keen to do so.
Well, Bangladesh has to open its borders. It has to let these people in. This is a humanitarian crisis of the first order. And now the international community has to step up and assure Bangladesh that they are going to be there to help, that there's going to be support for these people. Bangladesh has a significant number of Rohingya, numbering in several hundred thousand already from previous violence in Rakhine State. And so they have concerns, but they need to let those people in. There's not any other option there. This is their international obligation to protect refugees.
You talk about the international community needing to step in to help. This is not a new problem. The international community doesn't have a very good record of stepping in to help. Antonio Guterres, the UN Secretary General, has sounded the alarm. But are you seriously hopeful that anybody is going to step in to help?
Well, there's a limited amount of things that people can do in this remote corner of Burma in terms of the international community formally stepping in. I think what we'll see is action at the Human Rights Council later this month in Geneva, and quite possibly a new resolution at the UN General Assembly to raise concerns. What we're pushing for right now is for the Human Rights Council established fact-finding mission that was created in March to be allowed into the country. This is the impartial, independent investigators that should be going in to look at what has happened here and assigning accountability. The problem is that the Burma government and the Burma army are walking in lockstep, and that they don't want to have any outside witnesses. I mean, they've already stampeded the international community out of northern Rakhine State by Aung San Suu Kyi on her website reiterating that there might be terrorists amongst the international NGOs, that they might have been supporting some of these insurgents. And that essentially put a target on the back of humanitarians, and there's been an evacuation because of past threats against UN agencies and international NGOs operating in these areas. So, we need to have people on the ground. We need to have journalists. We need to have researchers. We need to have humanitarians, and we need to have this FFM, the fact-finding mission, to be allowed into these areas to find out and discover the truth and really bring it out for the world to see.
OK, Phil Robertson with Human Rights Watch speaking to us from Bangkok. Thank you very much.